Hello and welcome to The Extra Point. I am Kendall Gammon, and today joined by my good friend Dan Israel. Dan, appreciate you joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right, we are in the Starship Enterprise right now in your basement. We should be doing a tour of that as well, but we go back a long ways. I would say at least 12 years on the Chiefs Radio Network, but then even years before that, because I was playing and you were broadcasting. I'm going to be a This Is Us episode today. I'll be all over the timeline. There'll be no rhyme or reason to things, but just in general, just talk about how you got into the radio business and what started that.
Well, when I was really young, I saw a video in a music class in junior high school that kind of showed a behind-the-scenes view of what recording studios were like and what radio stations were like, and I just got enthralled with it at that point, and I began to make believe that I was in a radio station down in my parents' basement, and from there I decided I'd get a job in a radio station in college. And that actually became the beginning of my professional career at KCMO. So, well,
okay. So you went to Mid-American Nazarene. You graduated. Well, you studied what?
I studied computer science.
Okay.
And so I think my parents, in particular my stepdad, felt pretty strong about maybe, if radio didn't work out or if...
Right. Just giving you a fallback.
Yeah, son. Exactly.
Yep.
And unfortunately for him, fortunately for me, it kind of took off, and I very quickly became a full-time working professional in the radio business, and haven't really quit since.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something you love, obviously. We'll get into that. Now I'm going to back up just a little bit. You talked about your stepdad. Your father passed away when you were how old?
When I was 8 years old, my dad was killed in a plane crash. So my brother was, I think, 15 or 16 at the time, and I was 8. So my mom had her hands full for sure.
Yep. I remember you and I have talked about this a little bit. It was just in maybe other stories, but you distinctly remember maybe getting off the bus or something and seeing everybody there?
Very vividly. It's funny how memories will stick with you, and certain things can trigger those. And for some reason, I can still see like even the rubber in the aisleway of the school bus. I can still see the grooves in the rubber of it and remember walking along it. Wow. And that was actually far before. That was probably 10 minutes before my mom told me what was going on. But I can remember getting off the school bus, the steps, and I remember how much snow was in the yard, and there were bare spots where the grass was coming through. And the first thing that struck me odd with that was that there were a lot of cars in the park, parked around the house that shouldn't have been. But it's just funny how your memory kind of, it starts before that on the school bus ride, when I didn't know anything was wrong at the time. So, but very vivid memories of that for sure.
It's interesting. I lost my mom when I was 19, but I remember going home to see her and then going out with my friends because she was in the hospital and some stuff. I saw her and being out at a nightclub, and then very distinctly remembering telling my friends like I need to go home. And I did, and I ended up walking into my grandmother's house where I was staying, and the pastor from the Friends Church was there, and they were letting me know that she had just passed away that way. So I think personally, sometimes, I don't know if it's the spirit or what it is, but sometimes we just recognize things even before they happen.
There's definitely some kind of thread or connection that we don't understand and probably can't consciously perceive. I think, even with animals are that way. A dog will come up and put his head on your lap when he knows he needs to put his head on your lap, even if you don't. So I definitely think there is a whole current of that taking place on a daily basis.
Okay, so you do a lot of different things. You're very much into picture taking. I think you've won some awards. You were in the video side of things, video editing. You've produced a little bit in Nashville. I think we were talking off air that you've done some things with Amy Grant and maybe somebody who was in Jars of Clay, which is that was the Christian rock side of things a little bit. You play the piano. That's in the background there. How did it come to be that you were so eclectic or such a Renaissance man, I would say, with so many different things?
Well, I think music in particular I owe to my mother. My mother's a professional musician. She was the accompanist at Church of the Resurrection for 30 plus years. Started there when it was a very small church.
Right.
And really witnessed a lot of that growth, but just recently retired. And so for me, growing up with her, always playing at church, and prior to that, she was a longtime organist at a church in Independence, Missouri called First Christian Church, and I think she was there for 20 plus years. So I've always vividly remember my mom practicing and playing, and I would literally play underneath the grand piano that my parents had, and I would take my Matchbox cars and play under the piano. So I think music just kind of got into me back then.
Right.
Take that and the genes, and I think you end up with some kind of musician. I didn't know that I would be a working, musician. I thought I would be, an engineer or producer, but I had, because my mom taught piano as well, I took piano for 15 years, and some of it rubbed off on me, and I was able to use that later in life. And I still enjoy playing today, although, I would definitely, I feel like there are people who are working that craft. I don't. I don't sit and try to get better at the piano every day. So if you don't do that, you can't really stay in a working studio pro. You certainly can't be a session player.
Right.
And so those days are behind me, but I still enjoy it, for sure.
Well, just as we were setting up today, you went over there and played a little bit, and I'm sure that piano cringes when I've been over here so many times and play on it a little bit. It's
No, it loves to be played, man.
What the hell's going on?
You know that. It loves to be
played. Absolutely. So with that, I was fortunate enough to actually be at your mother's last performance, or last time at Church of the Resurrection in the arena, as I like to call it. That's just a beautiful place, but just really, really cool. Okay, so Chiefs Radio Network, how many years have you been involved with it?
Well, officially this is my 32nd season. When I started at KCMO during college, I was working the weekends at college as a board operator, and part of that was during the summer Royals games and during the fall Chiefs games. So I had some affiliation with the Chiefs going all the way back to 1983.
Wow.
But officially, the capacity that I serve now really started in 1990. When they moved from KCMO, the Chiefs radio network used to be on News Talk 81 KCMO for years. I think it was there from the inception.
Okay.
And when they moved to the Fox, there was a gentleman named Bill Newman who negotiated with Carl Peterson to put the Chiefs radio on FM. And so when they moved it to FM...
Which was a big deal, right?
It was a big deal, yeah. And turned out to be quite a bit more work than anybody thought, especially the way I wanted to do it. I think, just taking the product as it was, as an AM monaural broadcast and moving it to FM certainly wasn't that difficult, but, I wanted to make it better. I wanted to put mics down on the field. I wanted to make it stereo. I wanted it to feel like you were sitting in whatever stadium the Chiefs were playing, and that turned out to be a little bit of a challenge. So,
but you really thrive on that. I mean, you and I have talked. I mean, some people need to do different things to stay active and keep them going. And you've talked about before is your brain. I mean, you need that work with the brain to really keep going.
Certainly not as much at my age now as I was when I was younger. I had so much energy when I was younger. I would try anything.
Right.
And so, the challenge of that, if it meant staying up, all night for 5 nights in a row, I was up for the task, and myself, Nate Wetmore, who at the time really was my only other assistant, we put in a lot of long hours, and we tried a lot of innovative ideas to try to make things better, and some of them worked, some of them didn't, and the ones that did work, it's ironic because ISDN's a good example. We started ISDN in the National Football League alongside the Dallas Cowboys, and it was just us and the Cowboys. And I'll tell you, Kendall, man, I think I was probably 27 or 8 at the time, and it even got to me. I mean, there were times I think I looked at Nate and said, this might have been the wrong move, because it was such a dense, I call it a dense forest that we had to, forge our way through every single week. Just nobody knew anything about that technology. Right. Digital audio was just a buzzword. This is years before Steve Jobs would invent the iPod. This is years before really digital audio became a mainstay inside the recording studio, and probably a good 10 years before digital audio became part of a radio station. Right. So you might see a CD player, but that was it. Wow. So it was a bit of a task, and we bit off a lot there, but fast forward a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, and it became industry-wide the way you got a broadcast from a stadium back to the studio.
Right.
To the degree that not only did all 32 NFL teams do that, but I would venture to say probably every sports team did or still does do it. Now ISDN's been sunset by the phone companies that managed it, so it's probably on the end of its life cycle. But at one time, it was the mainstay for moving audio back and forth remotely.
Some of the issues you had, I just was going to say, you said it was before Jobs dealt with that stuff, but it was still his fault. And that, folks, that's just a little bit of an inside joke. But anything that goes wrong, we believe it's Steve Jobs' fault. It's a long story.
Apple or not, it was
Steve Jobs' fault. Okay, so you have the ISDN, but now, the NFL was just a few years back that it changed once again, correct, on how it dealt with it? And really the NFL looked to you to help bridge this divide.
Not just me, but to the group of guys who'd been around a long time, of which unfortunately,
you were the senior man.
Yeah,
though, right?
unfortunately, it just probably goes to say how old I am, but
it does, yes.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, you also, with age comes the experience of knowing where the potholes really can develop.
Right.
And so it was an opportunity for me to kind of, form the new what's going to take place over the next 10 or 15 years. And interestingly enough, there was a young lady who jumped into the fray who was kind of a producer role, not as technical probably as I am, but took on a lot. And it ended up being the Giants, the Chiefs, and the Raiders that kind of said, all right, here's what we think we should do. And, we had a lot of support from Westwood One and the network, the national partners for the National Football League as well. But it really took all of us, the 32 teams coming together. It took the national partners in SiriusXM, Westwood One, some of the streaming partners, Verizon, the Game Pass that we participate in. Everybody had to kind of come together and agree, how are we going to do this? Because with the loss of ISDN, there was really no path for us to get reliably our audio out of a stadium. And reliability, when you're talking about $250,000 a game for a broadcast here or there, every market's different, but it adds up very quickly. And so all 32 teams plus the partners had an interest in solving that problem, and it really did come together pretty well. And for the next 3 years, we know what it's going to be. Now, it may evolve after that. There'll come a day when radio isn't a frequency off of a tower that you tune in. You'll just stream it. Internet bandwidth will be such that's possible. But we're kind of having to bridge that gap, really, between where that is and where we are now.
We just assume this happens, and me being the layperson and certainly the dumbest person in that booth every time that we walk in, you just flip switches and they work. But I don't know how many times I came in and you have the cover off of something, you're soldering something, or we're 5 minutes from going on, 2 minutes from going on, and you're like, okay, go to the phone, get this. You start barking out orders because we're not ready to go, because that is really amazing to see. I think people would be really interested if they saw what's really going on to get that broadcast out of there.
Interested or scared? I'm not sure.
One of the two, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny how, and it's kind of a compliment. And I'm sure people, always said this to you as well when you were doing color. Is you make it sound easy, you make it sound effortless, and how much preparation goes into that. You're watching a lot of film. You're thinking through things, you're looking at statistics, and you're trying to analyze the future. You're trying to read a crystal ball and be prepared for that. And so when it sounds easy, it's a compliment.
Right.
It really is. But you're right. There's a lot of, for us in particular with Chiefs Radio, the connection alone has a plan A, B, C, D, and E.
Yeah.
And it's scary how many times we've gotten to C and D. Those are just, you walk into a stadium. I think you probably can think, even when you would get there with me early, you walk into this booth, it's completely empty.
Right. And
then you watch the guys start setting it up and turning it into a studio, and you hope that everything's gone right. You hope that the equipment arrived, which thankfully, the team, Alan Wright and his guys,
they do a great job.
Yeah,
yes.
They've always been. I've never had to worry about that. I spent the first 10 years worrying about it until I realized, why am I worrying about this? He's never messed it up yet.
Right.
So now that I've said that,
yeah.
But they're. You hope that the equipment arrives. You hope it arrives healthy. That because it takes a pretty good beating on an airplane,
right.
Just like everything else. Vibration is not great for those small electronics.
Right.
If you think about like the belt pack that we put you in, that used to be a huge box of equipment, and now it's this little tiny belt pack.
Mm-hmm.
And so all those miniature electronics can really take a beating with vibration. And so once you know that everything's working and it's the equipment's in good shape, you have to hope that the booth itself is in good shape.
Right.
Because the last guy that left it is not going to be back there this year. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain amount of whatever happens is the next guy's problem.
Yeah.
And so you're in and out very quick. And so there's a lot to it. And it does take a village to get that thing going. I think it's always interesting. We do a shortened preseason show. And we still have to get there at the same amount of time because the setup takes just as long. Even though we're not on the air,
right.
It still takes that long to set it up. So, but it's always a compliment, I think, when people say it sounds great. I mean, it just sounds like you guys are, exactly what you're doing, and it works every week. It doesn't. We don't. But thankfully, it sounds that way.
It does. Well, it's always funny, folks, because you're in there, and I'll see sometimes, Nate Wetmore, the sound engineer, we'll talk to Dan, and things aren't working, and he thinks it's this. And, there's sometimes he's right. Sometimes you're like, well, you want to check this. And every once in a while, I'll see Nate with a look like, and because it takes some tearing down. Yeah. And then he'll tear it down, and there's been numerous times where he's he looks up at me and it's like, I hate it when he's right. And it's things like that. But we really had a close camaraderie in there, which was a lot of fun. I mean, for so many different reasons.
No, it's a family, man.
Yeah.
It still doesn't feel right when I walk in and you're not there on Sunday. And Lynn Dawson was that way too. I traveled with Lenny for a long time, and so when Lynn finally stepped aside and retired, and you'd arrive on Sunday, it doesn't feel right. You get to be very close. I think for us, being close together in age, I think our group has been much tighter than probably any group we've had before. But it has to be that way because part of it's the travel. You're so close with the travel, and you'd drive each other crazy if you couldn't figure out a way to get along. Plus, and I think this is really what probably you could relate to most as an NFL player, you rely on the guy next to you.
Right.
You cannot do it yourself. Mm-hmm. And so when you realize that you can rely on the guy next to you and trust him to have your back, there does come kind of a brotherhood with that. And I know you always said that that's what you missed most in the locker room. And for sure, that's one of the things that still drives me today, because I think I've probably done everything I need to do.
Right.
I've certainly proven what I need to prove in terms of the broadcast, but it's being around the guys that I consider family every week that really is important and mean the most to me, for sure.
Okay, so you mentioned somebody who's an icon that everybody knows, I think, and even people outside of football know to a degree, is Len Dawson. Just talk to me about Len, what you learned from him. You guys were very, very close. I would venture to say you're as close to him as about anybody other than his wife, Linda, and just your thoughts.
Lenny and I were seatmates in the plane, much like you and I were, and so, but there's a generational gap there, and so I really felt like Lynn, especially growing up without a father, my actual dad, I felt like Lynn kind of took on some of that role for me. And what I always admired most about Lynn was that it was always about the work, and the work was important. He was always prepared. He was always ready. And when we were working, he was a professional at every level, and nothing distracted him. Nothing got in the way. He never came in one day tired. And so I learned a professional work ethic from him, one that really made him a Super Bowl champion, if you ask me. I learned that from him. And then in addition to that, all the time sitting beside him in the airplane, I really felt like he would mentor me in ways, why'd you do this? Or when I wouldn't say I was a hothead when I was young,
right?
But I would let things get to me. I didn't want a single mistake on the broadcast, and if there was a mistake and it was a needless one, I would get upset. And he asked me one time, he says, "What are you trying to accomplish when you get upset there?" And I thought, "What do you mean? What am I trying to accomplish?" And I realized, I realized very quickly that while the venting may have been beneficial for me, it wasn't helping me accomplish the ultimate goal that I wanted to. And those are the kinds of lessons that I learned from Lenny, and certainly, our job, our roles are different on Sunday, but that ethic I just think was really important, and he just really mentored me into becoming a man. And it was very difficult with this schedule, as you know, playing.
Right.
It doesn't yield for your family. It doesn't matter if your kid has a birthday. It doesn't matter if your kid's sick and in the hospital. Nowadays, yes. I mean, if you're looking at this today, it's a very different landscape. But in the 90s, people cut their fingers off so they could play the next week, right?
Right.
So in your era, in really the era that I cut my teeth in, the schedule was the schedule. It didn't move, and you were there every week. There was no backup. There was no, okay, well, I'm not going to be there this week, so, guy Y will take over, and if he's not there, guy Z takes over. None of that existed. And so for me, it was really a way to understand how Lynn had over 50 years managed that schedule, going back and forth to New York City, shooting inside the NFL, shooting the 6 and 10 o'clock news every night on KMBC, and then being a part of our team on Sunday. So it was a wonderful experience. Lynn has always been an incredible man to me, and I've been able to travel with him. I got to go to Super Bowl 50 with him, and they had all the Super Bowl MVPs there. And you've heard me tell the story many times. I'm in the suite with all the remaining living Super Bowl MVPs except Tom Brady. He was the only one not in the suite. And to hear the stories going back and forth, and this is a guy who really founded the league you played in, the very football game that you played. So. And so it was an opportunity really and I've always never taken it for granted. So many people I know want something, as you know, players. People want things from you.
Not so much long snappers, but all the same.
Well, I've seen it with you too.
But all the same.
So So it was just a wonderful experience to be around somebody that was not only such a professional, but a good role model. And look, we all have our demons and stuff, but as a role model, and here in Kansas City, his stature was well in excess of the way he acted. He could walk up to somebody on the street and would carry on a conversation for 3, 5, 7 minutes, even if he didn't have the time to do it.
Right.
And you know how I feel about the character. And so I always admired that about him. I always admired that about you as well.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. I'm just kidding around. But if you're okay with it, tell a story about when you were at Super Bowl 50 with Len and running into John Bon Jovi.
Sure. Well, Len has so much demand on for personal appearance, and so in that we had a whole Saturday, the day before the Super Bowl. I think it was 10 and a half hours. Literally at the end of the day, Kendall, I was exhausted. Yeah, Lenny still had a little in him. I don't know how, but I was exhausted. But we were, this one event we were at had just so many, it was star-studded. There were so many people there, Shaquille O'Neal, and just top to bottom. I remember thinking, if I could take pictures, I could make a lifetime of scrapbook just in this hour and a half. And a lot of people coming up to Lynn wanting to take his picture and get his autograph. And one of those guys was a gentleman who came up and said, Lynn, can I get my picture with you? And Lynn said, absolutely. What do you do? And he said, oh, I'm a musician. And he says, are you any good? And he says, yeah, I have a band. And so they went on, and he asked Lenny if he listened to rock and roll. And Lynn says, no, I like Tony Bennett. But the long and short of it was John Bon Jovi. And while Lynn couldn't appreciate it, Kendall, I could.
You could, tremendously. But that's the thing about Lynn is, all those stars that you were kind of wowed by, and most anybody would be wowed by, they for the most part all knew who Len Dawson was. Yeah. Even the other MVPs are like, that's Len Dawson.
Yeah, without a doubt, the most fascinating part, and I actually made a book of this and gave it to him. But the most fascinating part about that Super Bowl 50 trip was the orientation when we arrived at the hotel, I think on a Thursday or Friday. they had an orientation breakfast for everybody. And so all the Super Bowl MVPs, I think there were 39 of the 41 there. And all the Super Bowl MVPs are in that room. So think about it. There's guys like Tom Brady, like,
Montana,
Lynn Swann, Ray Lewis, Drew Brees. The list goes on and on and on and on. And at the end of that orientation, it was breakfast and people could just mill around. Lenny never got out of his seat. A line formed behind him. All these guys wanted their picture with him. Larry Zonka, it's just one guy after another.
Yeah. Who are names themselves.
That's the amazing part about it. I mean, they could have done, pictures with their friends or whoever, but they all wanted their picture with Lynn Dawson. And it was fascinating to me because he really rose above, in my mind, of these 39 guys that had all achieved the same status. Not all of them in the Hall of Fame, but a lot of them. A lot of them. And he just rose above where he never even got the chance to go eat breakfast. The line, I mean, it was just one person after another.
And gracious, I'm sure,
very,
with everything.
Very, yeah. And a lot of them he was friends with, I mean, they would sit and tell stories. I remember when Zonka walked up to him and they started talking about it. I think it was one of the playoff games. I don't think it was the Christmas Day game because Lynn doesn't like to talk about the Christmas Day game. But Zonka started talking, and they're talking about players that we've all forgotten.
Right.
But yeah, it was such a fascinating time, and we capped off that weekend by when we went back home. We were flying home. We went into the airport, and we were moving along we were standing on the moving walkway in the airport, and they had done this Super Bowl tribute of photos all along the moving walkway, and I realized we were approaching Lynn's, and so I was able to take Lynn on the moving walkway with Lynn in the background, and it was like, there you go. I mean, it couldn't get any better than that, and it was a great weekend. It was a wonderful Super Bowl. That was the same Super Bowl, by the way. I was sitting in the suite, and I was trying to behave myself because, what I really wanted to do was record everything, take pictures, but I was just listening to everything, and so when the anthem took place, I recorded the flyover with my phone, and so I sat back down. I wasn't really thinking about much. I was waiting for the game to start, and the guy who was sitting next to me nudged me and said, "Hey, can you send me that?" And I said, "Sure. What's your cell phone number?" So he gave it to me, and I text messaged him this video of the flyover. And then when I actually looked him square in the face, I realized he had a ball cap on and sunglasses, but I realized it was John Travolta. Oh. So it was like, that booth was just an amazing experience.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. That's really cool. But you've worked with everybody. Bill Grigsby, Kevin Harlan, Mitch Holthus. I'll throw myself in there. But Lynn Dawson, we already talked about. Of course, Danon is doing it now. You've got Josh Klingler. You had Danny Welniak.
Yeah.
I mean, just some great people. And the one constant has been you. Now, that doesn't take into effect the folks behind the scene, Nate Wetmore, Travis Schlinger,
Eric Townsend, Steve Cook.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys have been with me 10 years. I've got guys back in the studio too. Derek Nestor's been there forever.
Right.
We've had a long time. Art Haynes has been on a host for quite some time. But, and Nate's certainly been with me the longest. I think over 20 years. Mm-hmm. And I've really depended on him. And not only because his loyalty, but because it is a very difficult job, Kendall. I mean, you need someone whose ears you can trust.
Right.
It's a loud environment. And, so to have somebody that you could trust to mix the product while I'm focusing on something else. Right. When I stepped away from mixing it myself, he was the only guy I could trust to do that, and so and he's been doing it ever since. But to your point, one of the wonderful things about that tenure is all of those people. It's been, Grigsby was certainly not. He had well earned his status and personality before I ever got there. Same with Lynn Dawson. Kevin Harlan and I. Kevin is actually, when I was at KCMO, I mentioned in the early 80s, 1983, I was a board op. Kevin was an intern that was coming over from KU, and he would actually work in the news booth. And I remember really clearly one day I saw him, I looked over and I saw him like talking nonstop, and I thought, I wonder what he's doing. And I popped his studio into my queue so I could hear what he was doing. Well, he was calling a game off the TV. He was just watching it on TV and calling play-by-play, and I thought, wow, he's really good. Well, 3 years later, he became the voice of the Chiefs when Wayne Larrivee moved on, and then in 1990, when they moved to KCFX, he recommended, I think, to Bill Newman to get me, and that's how I got back involved. Kevin and I had done a pregame show called I think NFL Sunday. I don't even remember what it was called now, but I remember when he first approached me about it, I thought, there is no way people are going to tune in that early on a Sunday. Now we go on the air at 9 o'clock. So Kevin was right all along, and such an incredibly talented person, but was very instrumental in getting me to the Chiefs. Then in 94, when Kevin left for CBS, Mitch joined the crew. Mitch had done a game, I think, in 91, substituted for Kevin. So in 94, the decision was made that he would be the new play-by-play, and he's been there ever since, obviously. Bill retired shortly, maybe after the 2000 season, and then, of course, Lenny, and I think it was 2016 or 17. You had already begun in 2008 as sideline reporter. You stepped into the color role when Lenny retired, and I'll tell you, pal, those were some big shoes you stepped into, and I worried about you at the time, but you did just fine. Well,
a lot of that was started 3 years prior when we were just right over here on the other side of your studio. We come in on Thursdays and I'd call games, and if that's not a lesson of taking advantage of your opportunity and being thankful for somebody to help you out, I mean, that's certainly something that made a difference in my life, something that we'll talk about here in a minute. Trying to think, I tell the story when I speak. You reminded me of it, but and I want to know if I've got it right, kind of. But I remember maybe the first away game we were at. We went out and we had a beverage the night before, and you asked me, do you remember somebody getting on the plane carrying some equipment and a cup of coffee? And I had to think. I was like, I do. Was that one of the crew or whatever? He goes, and you were like, yeah, no, that was me that you did that. And I always think it's amazing. I was simply trying to help somebody out that I saw that was in need, and maybe it's just my love of Starbucks coffee. But do I have it right?
Yeah, no, you have it right. I think it was San Diego, and I had worked all night the night before, and there was some delay us boarding the plane that day, and so we were all milling around the airport, which was a little unusual. We didn't obviously I think it was pre 9/11, but whether or not it was, we were milling around the airport, which was unusual. And so a bunch of us got in line for Starbucks, and something happened, and I had to start carrying a second bag. So I had a bag on each shoulder, and I had my Starbucks, and you sat, because you were a veteran, sat in first class. Well, we boarded the plane through first class, and so when I was walking along, you saw me struggling with these bags, and you popped up, grabbed a bag, and I couldn't dissuade you from doing it.
You tried.
Yeah, I did.
Said, no, seriously. Because you're like, no, I've got it. Because you guys were encouraged not to talk to the players. I was like, clearly you do not have it. And let me help you at the very least. I'll carry something back there and we're good to go.
But yeah, you carried my bag all the way to the back of the plane where we sat and put it up there for me. And I just never forgot that, that was not usual for a player. It was not usual for a lot of human beings these days. I mean, we all are in, those days are a little different now. But it certainly stood out to me probably in whatever this was, 2000, 2001.
Well, it was 2001. I tell the story because, I'm not trying to play myself up, but I tell the story because, when you do the right thing, you never know. You ultimately were the one who basically hired me then in 2008, 7 years later. And it's just, you never know how something's going to affect you on down the line.
It's so true. And I think that's a lesson for anybody to learn, in that it was very important to me, the character of the individual that would replace the sideline position. Because I knew how tight our crew is. I knew that we would be in close quarters. I knew that we would be traveling together. And so your character meant a lot. The person's character that was going to fill this role meant a lot to me. So, I was able to draw from my own personal knowledge about you from years prior to that. You
Which
really
I had
don't
forgotten
know.
about until you brought that up. And I was like, oh, yeah, I do kind of remember that. And folks, just so you know, done plenty of bad things, plenty of wrong things, certainly. So this is not a holier than thou, but it did teach me a lesson that, you treat people the right way.
It's a good lesson, I think, for everybody. And I think it still works today, whether it has as much benefit or not. It's really irrelevant, because when you put your head on your pillow at night,
Yep.
It has a lot of benefit there, and I've always loved that about you in particular, because with it's interesting with football players. There's so much demand on you guys when you play. I think there grows this sense that I need to do this. That's their job, and
Right.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but you see it in a lot of players, and you got to be the only player that I know of that would go in early on Sunday morning and start helping the equipment guys load their lockers. Even as you worked for me as a color, there was nothing for you to do. You would help the equipment guys
Right.
get set. And I just think that says a lot about someone's character, and it's an impressive trait.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, literally, I have folded thousands of towels with Alan and Schrupp and Kyle when he was there.
I was just looking at some towel folding you did in Windsor Castle.
Were you? Yes,
Yeah.
I did some very creative towel folding.
Yeah, I don't think the equipment guys would have appreciated that you're folding
I think
Billy
they
as
would
much
have
as
really.
I did.
Yeah, no, it was that.
They
one,
would have.
that
You're
one was
right.
Special.
They would have.
Well, folks, if you know me, then you kind of know what it is. If you don't know me, then you're just not going to get it, because we're going to keep this on the level. So
I am me. I'll send you the picture.
Okay, we're going to take this down a little bit, which is 8 years ago.
2015.
2015.
So that's 6 years ago.
6 years ago, you had a diagnosis, which was
Yeah, so it's funny. It started in you talk about family and how we take care of one another. It started in 2015 at training camp.
Yeah.
I had just been having this,
And I remember that because we were lifting weights together and stuff, and I remember you talking about
and
it.
we ate lunch. So I'm sure you were there when Dr. Monaco recommended this. But I had just mentioned to Mike. I said, I think, what should I do for an ulcer? I said, I get a little bit of an ulcer. And he said, why do you think you have an ulcer? And I said, just sometimes when I eat certain things, I can't really put my finger on what it is. But I said, sometimes I get a little bit of a burning sensation. And he said, where at? And I put my hand on my left hip. And he was like, you're 50 years old. Why don't we run you for a battery of tests? And he, at the time, knew, Kendall. I mean, he's told me since. He suspected at the time. But as part of those tests was a colonoscopy, which I needed to do at 50 years old. And I would say anybody out there that's even close to 50, get a colonoscopy.
Yeah.
I don't care how much you think the prep is tough, you need it. Early detection, man, is such a difference. But so I woke up out of the colonoscopy and was told basically that they had found a tumor and they suspected that it was cancer. That they wouldn't know for sure, but they'd send it off and find out. About an hour or two later, after I got home, I was a little more, I was a little groggy at first from the anesthesia, but about an hour or two later, I got a call from Mike Monaco, and he said, Dan, we've seen enough of this; it's cancer. We'll wait to get the test results back, but you need to get set for surgery. They need to get that out, and the whole process of changing my life started right then and there. I mean, it really was It was a Thursday, September 10th, 2015. Our first game was, I think, the 13th. And so I got everybody together on the hotel on Saturday night. Really didn't know even what the future was going to hold. I just knew that I was in for some change. And for a guy who, I think I'd done 540 something games straight, I knew that was about to change. And so I told all of you guys, and we began the process of kind of, shifting positions around to get to a point where you guys could do a game without me. And sure enough, I had, surgery that year, went through some chemo, and thought it was doing pretty good. And then right before Super Bowl 54 in 2019, I was just part of a routine scan. My doctor sat me down and said, these spots we've been watching in your lungs, we're pretty sure they're cancer now. So I knew the battle wasn't over. And it's been a year and a half of treatment since then. So it's been less than fun. That's why I say early detection.
Yeah. Okay. So, and you can stop me at any time, but we've had some pretty heart-to-heart talks. I mean, you hear talking about living in the present, whatnot, but I think sometimes that's just talk. I work at it, but you and I have talked. I mean, and this is really, I feel like it's drove home to you more because of, I mean, there's been times where you've been told, 18 to 36 months or whatever. Yeah. You're past that and you're moving along and doing some things, but can you put it into words in terms of how it's affected you?
Well, for sure, it reorients your perspective. I was always a type A personality. I'm sure I'm still a type A personality. But as part of that, I think one of the things you do is you tend to plan for the future. You tend to say, okay, I need to be ready for this. I need to have that prepared, and I need to do this. And a lot of times in doing that, you're spending time in the future, not now. And so you tend to sacrifice the now for the future. And it's a very hard lesson. You hear people say you shouldn't take your health for granted, all the time. You hear that all the time. But absolutely. To your point, if you didn't take your health for granted, you wouldn't get out of bed without dropping to your knees and thanking, God every day. So it is tough, but one of the things that it has taught me is to really stay focused on trying to find the things that matter most to you. Mm-hmm. If it all, when somebody tells you you have 2 or 3 summers left, I think that puts it in perspective. You have 2 or 3 Christmases left. It's like, okay, well then what do I really want to do at Christmas? Who do I really want to see at Christmas? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to sacrifice anything here. Right. I'm not going to skip this. I'm not going to, do this when I want to do that. So it has a way of really lasering your focus into what's important to each person, or in my case, me. And so from, that part of it, I would say has been healthy for me. I mean, can't really say it's been a good thing, right?
No, I agree.
But that part of it certainly has kept me more in tune with, like you and I sitting down today. Right. You matter to me, and so I'm sitting here because I want to be with you, not because there's not a mountain of work. That mountain will always be there. Right. But what matters to me most is you, and what matters to me most is how we spend our time and enjoying ourselves. And so I think that part's a blessing. I really do, because I spent a great deal of my life not being that way. But boy, it's a hard way to learn that lesson.
Well, yeah, I mean, and there's some talks that we've had that I won't get into because, quite honestly, not that you wouldn't talk about them, but I wouldn't be able to do it without you just getting a little bit too emotional. But I've learned a lot from it, and I mean, I do remember the one time you told me about how you were fighting it in the plan or whatever, and you're like, listen, if this gets me here and this gets me another 12 months, I can live the hell out of 12 months. That was hard to hear. Because I think the empathy for a best friend, I mean, you're like a brother to me, maybe more than that. So it is difficult. And then it taught me a lesson to look more at what's important and what's going on.
Your personality is, you'll understand this. I think one of the hardest things about a cancer diagnosis is it's so difficult personally, emotionally, when somebody tells you, you have to face this. Mm-hmm. This, you can't run from it. There's no way to get away from it when it's you. You have to face it. But what you really, I think the thing that kind of caught me off guard was it affects everybody around you. Right. And your attitude and all of that rolls into the people that are next to you, the people that love you. And there are times when it's very dark. I mean, nobody wants to, you wake up and you're, why me, very Joey-ish kind of attitude. Mm-hmm. And so that's part of it. Mm-hmm. That's just part of the process. But you when you realize that, there's a little bit of a reflection of everything that you do and the people that love you and want to care and support for you, it almost increases that burden, right? You're more worried about maybe somebody else's reaction to what you're about to say or feel. Than the fact that you're like, listen, I think you've heard it. It's I'm the one that's sick, not you. It's very difficult, and at times you and I could sit and cry together. And, and at times you'd cry, I wouldn't. At times I'd cry, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. But but I do think that it's so important to have a support mechanism, to have people that love you and to have people that care for you. And for those of you, I would say as a cancer survivor, one of the things that I would say is that if you're trying to support someone with this just can be brutal diagnosis, certainly stage 4 from my case is, understand it's very dynamic. It changes from moment to moment. And one of the best things, and you're really good about this, one of the best things you can say is, let me know if you need anything.
Exactly. Because
there's times I want to be alone.
Right.
There is times I want to be with you and not talking about it. And there's times I need to talk about it. But you know, trying to pry on those as another individual, I think what is most frustrating to people trying to support a cancer victim, a cancer survivor, someone with that diagnosis, is that, you know, if you can't get them to your plane of discussion while you're there. And I just know from my own standpoint, I don't really control where my thoughts go from moment to moment like that. I just feel them.
Right.
And so if you're at this place and I'm at that place, it's a lot harder for me to get to where you're at than for you to, you know, to meet me.
So I won't name names because that's not important, but I think this is important for people to understand because we've talked about this. Sometimes people, they love you to death, they want to help you, and in doing so, they decide to take up the cause and they start doing things that I think really sometimes doesn't make you very comfortable, or things you don't care for. And I don't think the people that do that, because there's lots of people that do that, I think they need to be careful to understand and empathize with this person that, you know, maybe they don't want me to go about it this way, or maybe I should talk to them about it first before I do this or that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, everybody handles it a little different.
Right.
You know, it's you and I, for what we do, somewhat live in the public.
Right.
And when you're going through something like this, for me, my personal tendency is to keep it private. It's very hard to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's certainly a value in being public about it. I've had people tell me that it's inspirational, and I appreciate all that. But ultimately, the guy I got to worry about is me. And so, and I think everybody wants to handle it a little different. I just think it's important that you figure that out, how each person wants to handle it. Because I do think some people would enjoy a certain approach while others would cringe from it, you know.
Right.
And so you need to know which that is before you take that approach. And it's one of the hardest things, I think. You know, any death is I would throw that in as well. Unexpected death. Chiefs Radio Network just lost somebody due to metastatic breast cancer, and it was a little bit. We knew she had. I'm speaking of Krista Patrick, and she was diagnosed stage 4 as well, and we knew this day would come. I was not expecting it.
Nobody had any idea it was this close.
No, I mean, she had been working. You know, hey, my treatment's causing me fatigue. Can we get somebody in to help me and do this and that? But I mean, she was working on the Tennessee Titans game as we get set to cut this, or as we're cutting this today. Last week's game, and on a Thursday, and gone on a Friday.
Yeah.
So, you know, death, I would throw death in there is the same way, and everybody handles it different, right? And so there can be, there can be a deepened story to a death or cancer, things behind the scenes that not everybody's aware of, makes it very difficult to deal with. And so, you know, a sensitivity to that is definitely called for, but yeah, it's tough. I've seen it right, and I've seen it wrong, and you know.
Nobody does either on purpose. It's just how people are, and sometimes people just don't understand how to handle things. And
I do think that's a really valid point. You know, it's never intentional. You know, and so you do have to kind of separate the intent from the actual deal, what they mean, because they do mean well, and that part of that outgoing pouring of spirit has just been amazing. I mean, to watch from every angle.
I've seen some of it. Okay, we'll bring them back up a little bit. Folks, if you can, I don't know if you can see, but we each have one of these.
We're not going to talk Chiefs football because right now that isn't up.
Exactly right. Okay, so, I mean, this is the pinnacle of the NFL, of getting to the Super Bowl and winning it. In your mind, when you look at that ring, what does it mean to you?
You know, it's funny, and I think we're similar in this, but early on in my career in 1994 with Joe Montana, going up to play the AFC Championship game in Buffalo, or was that 93? 93. Going up to play the championship game in Buffalo, I really thought we'd have opportunities with Marty Schottenheimer to win Super Bowls, and so that didn't happen. And then we went through the year playing days, and then Herm Edwards and Todd Haley, and you realize that ring is elusive. That is very difficult to get. And so I think I really thought that the ring would mean good football. This is football like we've never seen. And it does, because it is not easy. You got to be not only good, you got to be lucky, you got to be the right kind of, you have to have a locker room that's just tighter than imaginable to really be able to win it all. And so the ring represents a lot of quality football and people. But for me, when I received my ring, everything shifted from what I thought it would mean to what it actually means. And when I look at it now, and when I put it on my hand and I see it, other people see the Super Bowl. They see Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. What I see is our crew and how much our crew endured. And
it is exactly me.
Yeah. And it makes me think of the time. I can picture us in Miami. I can picture us in the booth. The moments that we spent really were special. And so that it's funny. I just didn't expect that. It's not what I expected it to mean, but that's what it means.
So that's interesting, because I've told this story when I was at Pittsburgh State and we won the national championship, and the game was over. So I came out with about 4 minutes left. I remember standing on the sideline next to a coach who had been a former teammate, and it ticks off. We win the national championship, and I just looked around and I was like, "So is that it?"
Yeah.
I mean, I was happy, but I didn't run up to hold the trophy. It was just. It's about the relationships you form. I mean, for us, I go back to Pittsburgh, us walking along, we got a picture of you and I and the Ben and Jerry's, stuff and all the things we did with John, Steve, Eric, Nate. And, Eric Eric occasionally gets a little bit of crap from us, and we have a good time with that. I mean, there's just...
So that's his role, isn't it?
That is his role, and he embraces it.
Yeah, I think so.
He embraces it. But you're exactly right. We think it's the peak, but it's actually about the journey all the way up.
Yeah, that game, for those of you who don't know, at the end of a game, it's very fast paced. You go down, you cut stuff in the locker room, you get dressed, you get equipment packed on the truck, and you get back on a bus, and you are out of that stadium. You're literally on your way to the airport within an hour after that final whistle. And there's always that tempo to the end of a game, always, except Super Bowl 54. And we went downstairs, and we all looked at each other and said, "Let's go out on the field." We went out on the field and spent maybe an hour or two out on the field, and we just enjoyed one another. And it really was about all the times and all the sacrifices, all the things we'd put into that. And to get there together as a crew and to pull off this massive broadcast fairly successfully, it meant so much. And that we didn't want that night to end. I mean, we went back to the hotel, and the team had already begun their party with Flo Rida and
Pitbull.
Yeah, Pitbull, right?
Yeah.
And so that went on all night, and we never went to sleep. We just, I remember turning to the individual next to me, who happened to be my son, who the Rams had sent to Super Bowl to cover it. He came to the party with me, and I turned to him and I said, "How long do these things go?" And he said, "Oh, probably 5 a.m." And I said, "Well, I'm not staying up that late. I can't make it that late." And that's when he turned to me and he started laughing. He said, "Dad, it's 4:51 right now."
Yeah, exactly. So, I feel like there's a good chance.
But we just didn't want that night to end.
No.
And so when I put this ring on, or I see it in a moment of quiet, the things I think about most are for us being together. Those photos that we
Yeah.
take come flashing back,
Yeah.
the memories.
Well, and you talked about your son, but he was there in the booth with us. I mean, that had to be special. I took pictures of you and Matt together. I mean,
Yeah, it
that's
was.
awesome.
You know, again, I was not expecting the level of emotions to come from that game. I was preparing to go down to the field, win or lose. I would have been down on the field after the game, and so in order to get there, I think it was probably maybe 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter. So I was putting on the NFL's deal and put all the stickers on where they needed to be so that I could get on the field. This is the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I had my back turned to the field, really wasn't watching. I was just listening to Mitch. And when that call came and we knew that was it, the game was clinched, I looked up and saw Matt and I just lost all emotions. I mean, I just started crying, and he was prepared for it. He had been through it with the Rams the year before, and so he was rolling his GoPros from every direction, but what an emotional time. And when I look back on that footage now and I see everybody's face and how we're high-fiving one another, and it was such an amazing time. And really, I can see why these teams, like Lenny Dawson's team, Willie Lanier, Jan Stenerud, Bobby Bell, these guys have formed a brotherhood that just can't be broken.
Right.
And so I can understand that. While we weren't in those trenches fighting, we were in our trenches fighting together. So it'll always be something special, man.
Yeah, it really was cool. So, okay, I always like to talk about a couple things during this. One being gratitude. I think it's the sincerest form of emotion that everything else springs up out of. Most all people are certainly grateful for their family, but after that, what are some things that you're grateful for in your life, be it events and or other people?
Well, I've always said that I'm very grateful that my imagination is so vivid, because I feel like that has been a fuel to the creative process that I've used my whole career, whether it's writing music, whether it's broadcasting. If you can't envision it, it makes it very hard to do. And so I've always been very thankful for the creativity. But I would also say the adversity that I've faced in my life. I really feel like under the heading of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I feel like that's been the case with me. Losing my dad young, having to go through some of the things that we went through early on. Even Chiefs Radio, having to do a lot of the role by myself in the early 90s taught me the value of having other people as we grew the broadcast. Starting my own business with my brother in 1988, we started it in my basement at my house in Blue Springs, Missouri. And now as we sit, and this is a multi-million-dollar business, you realize that all of those multi-million dollars come from somebody's hard work.
Right.
Not me, not my office. Yeah, I sign the tax returns, but I'm not downstairs working every penny of it. And so I feel like, if anything, the things I would be most grateful for are having people around me that I've been able to rely on to do both their work and have my back. And really, it's definitely the thing is this honor of the Hall of Fame induction that was bestowed on me. I really felt like, I got into that on the backs of all these people that I work with, and I wanted to take them all with me. And it's my name they're going to put in there, which is, what a great ego stroke that is. But the reality of it is, without Nate Wetmore, without you, without Mitch, without Lenny, all these guys, Eric and Steve, the guys that have been carrying my backpack when I couldn't carry it. So I say the people, probably.
Yep. Okay. My other thing that I talk about is it's the hashtag world, make a difference. Can you think of a few people and or events in your life that have made a difference that come to mind specifically? Try to ask you the tough questions.
I think those moments of adversity definitely were difference makers. I think I had there were a couple of guys. Nick Marshy gave me an opportunity when I was in college to go on the air I think without that, I might not have had the opportunity to do some of the production that got me noticed, got me hired at KCMO. Butch Berrickman, who I mentioned in my induction speech, and Rich Robin were both very instrumental people in teaching me what radio was all about. And certainly my mother and my music career has been a huge impact. Those were all people that made a huge difference in my life. In terms of moments, that you have those defining opportunities. Losing my father young, you have the opportunity to make good from that or to let it destroy you. And I think that, for me, I really learned that I could stand on my own and be, I did have an incredible older brother. My brother David has always supported me and always been there for me, especially after I lost my dad. So after we lost our dad. But, those kinds of, you realize there are moments throughout your career where there's opportunities to go left or right. And, I would say that for the most part, those have worked in my favor and they've made a difference. So, hopefully it's great to culminate those in a Super Bowl, but I never would have gotten there had, Kevin Harlan not told Bill Newman, called Dan Israel.
Right. It is amazing. I think it's Steve Jobs. It always gets back to Steve Jobs. I mean, he has a quote that says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. Only when you look back can you see where the dots connected. And I think that's what we often do. I mean, you've just got to trust that you're trying to do the right thing each and every time. When you look back, I think is when you're like, oh, okay, so that made sense, and that's how I got here and there. And I think it's a wise person that's able to look back and see where they connected. And
I think, Jobs was great at learning. For a guy who was so headstrong, didn't always make, I still to this day don't quite understand why he had such a problem putting a power button on the iPod, just refused to do it, right?
Right.
But that kind of concept, to me was you got to win more than you lose.
Right.
And you got to be able to look backwards and say, yeah, that was a mistake. I can do that better next time.
Right. Yep. Okay. So we didn't talk about it earlier, but I do want to bring this up, which is you said you took you took the broadcast to FM, but you were also the first one to do it in neural surround sound as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that was a big deal as well, and it continues to be. Explain to people a little bit about that process and what's involved in it, because it just doesn't happen by itself.
No, and really, without getting incredibly technical, my goal there was to say, all right, I want a listener, if a listener is listening in his home theater, I want it to feel like he is sitting in a seat at Arrowhead. He can hear the people behind him screaming. He can hear the team in front of them balking out calls. He can hear the PA in the distance. He can hear the ref. He can hear everything, and then we'll throw some radio in on top of that as well. And that was really the driving force behind making a three-dimensional sound field for somebody to listen to. It was technically much harder to do, in part because we had to use existing technology of radio. Television has multiple 8 channels that they can work with. FM has 2. And so we had to wait for somebody to invent some equipment to accomplish this. And the people that did, De Sequeira, came to us and said, hey, we've got this equipment. Do you think you could use it?
Okay, I did not know this. I didn't know it was that new.
And then so we said, yeah, we could probably use this. And then it became okay, well, how do we use it? And so we began to complicate Nate Wetmore's life, which is, a formula that seemed to have worked very well for me. So I'm just going to keep doing it. But that, we added shotgun microphones into the crowd that weren't there and really tried to draw that three-dimensional crowd box for you to sit in. I mean, almost to the degree that you want to make sure somebody isn't going to spill a beer on you. And so that neural surround technology really came about early on. And then as this company presented this equipment to us, we began to use it and get better at it, and then we started getting noticed for it. I started getting calls from car manufacturers saying, hey, we're going to put DTS surround in our cars.
Oh, wow.
Can you send us some sample audio? We want to test it. And so that was an interesting, development in the whole thing. And yeah, it's been a fun time. It's been, I love the innovation behind it. Once you get good at something, it doesn't seem very complicated. But it was fun in the initial stages of trying to figure out how we were going to do it.
Absolutely. Well, it was that mind thing of how do I make this work? And we could tell stories all day, but I'm going to end. I'll work to end it on this one. So for folks, if you don't know, we would go to the stadium about 4.5 hours early to get set up and everything. And invariably, I would always ask if I could help, knowing that I knew nothing about anything. It was kind of the rolling joke. But I remember
you were very good at getting us coffee.
I was very good at doing nothing. A tremendous slouch. But I remember, we would always be sitting down there. You were prepping for some stuff. I'd be looking over my notes, prepping also. And Nate Wetmore would generally choose what music we were going to listen to that morning. And on this particular day, he went with the Michael Jackson theme. So Michael Jackson is playing, and we're listening to it. I don't know which song it was. I feel like Michael had probably more than one hit. And I just hear out of the corner of my ear, you say, man, Michael, he goes, man, I wish I'd had a chance to work with him more. And I was like, whoop, whoop, whoop. You said more. That implies that you worked with him some. And your response to me, I tell a lot, which is, oh, did I never tell you I worked with Michael Jackson? And my response was, no, you never told me that you worked with the King of Pop. No, I never heard that. So
I wrote most of it.
You wrote most of that. Yeah, exactly right. But talk about that a little bit.
I had an opportunity, I think it was 1985, 86, when the Bad album was released, to do a video shoot with him for MTV. And they as entourages typically do, they prepare you. And we all got instructed, don't look at Mr. Jackson in the eye, don't talk to him directly, don't touch him, don't come within 3 feet of him. And I thought, oh brother, this guy's a prima donna. And he walked onto the set and was anything but. Very easygoing, super cordial and friendly. Said, you want me to sit down and do a mic test or any of that? And I didn't find any of that to be the case. He was super easy going to work with. And so we had done, I think it was 3 days we spent with him. And there was some music involved in it. And it was just an interesting crowd to be around. And for me, hard to reconcile all of the stories that I heard in the end days, but
because of your
I just never saw any of that stuff, as opposed to a guy like O.J. Simpson, who that didn't surprise me at all. But with him, it was he was a very gentle soul, and so, but man, what a talent! And to get to hear that voice live and to hear it, to see it, just the raw talent on. 6
so
feet
many
in front
different
of me.
levels.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that stood out to me is you said it was a sound check, and he made mention of the fact of, because you could do the sound check evidently without him to a degree, and he made me mention, he goes, would it be better if I did it? And we're like, well, yeah, of course. He goes, well, okay, then I will.
Yeah, and they didn't want us to touch him or any of that stuff. And, you're going to run a microphone up, between his t-shirt, and the man wore a white t-shirt, and that was it. Right. So you're going to run a microphone up between his t-shirt and his skin, and so that constitutes touching him, and he had no problem with any of that. He was just a professional. He was such a normal guy. It was shocking. And because you're talking about even at this time,
he was,
my goodness, the security around this shoot was immense. And it was immense for a reason, because we were outside of the building that we were in. There were probably 5,000 fans. Wow. And just screaming just for the glimpse of him. Yeah. They weren't going to get into the building. He wasn't going to go out and greet them. They just wanted to catch a glimpse of him going from the building to his car.
That never happened to me, by the way.
And not 5,000, maybe 1,000.
Maybe 5. Yeah, that is amazing to me, though, because and you appreciate that. I mean, and we've lived a charmed life to be around a lot of different people. I mean, you were around Joe Montana and different folks, and that superstar status, and Lynn, and
but
I always count myself lucky.
But don't you think too that when you're around somebody like that you realize, okay, despite the way everybody talks about them, despite the stature, the public stature that they've achieved, they're normal. That to me has always fueled me to say, okay, I will never be that prima donna.
Ever, no.
No matter what I've done or I've accomplished, I can never do that. And I think, it pales in comparison when you see, these just vastly, a guy like Itzhak Perlman, there is no better violin player in the world, right? And yet he's the most humble human being that you'll ever want to meet, kind of. I feel like those are all lessons to us because, you see it nowadays. We were in the airport the other day and there was a gentleman throwing an absolute fit in the line of Starbucks. And, the only thing I could think of was, well, look, you still don't have cancer, dude. And I don't care who you are, you can't treat other people that way.
I concur.
I feel like those are valuable lessons to get to see people that famous. I had a friend who plays keyboards for Garth Brooks and is a session player in Nashville. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, are you got anything going today?" And I said, "No. I can come meet you." And he was in town. And so he said, "Can I bring a friend?" And I said, "Sure." So I went and picked him up, and we drove down to the plaza. Well, his friend was Peter Frampton.
Of course it was. Why wouldn't it be Peter Frampton?
Spent the whole day with Peter Frampton.
That is awesome.
You wouldn't have known him from a roadie if I'd picked him up. And so I there's so many examples of that. And when you see the other, it really stands out as wrong.
It does, but doesn't it make you? It makes me realize that when you're around these people, you're like, okay, for the most part, we build people up in our minds of what we think they are or will be, and we get around them. It's just Bruce Dickinson. He just puts his pants on one leg at a time. Except he makes gold records. That's from Saturday Night Live, by the way. But it's just they're just normal people.
I need a little more cowbell.
Always more cowbell.
I do think that's right. We build them up, and I think the mistake is when the person actually starts to believe it.
Yeah, I would be the first to admit there were times in my career where I think I got a little cocky while I was playing. Really? I think so. Now, I don't think I showed it very much, but internally I can look back and think this. And I think where it showed for me is I exhibited a little bit too much confidence. I really felt like I was right on a lot of different things. And I can honestly say, you know what, it wasn't an awful Kendall Gammon, but it wasn't the best version of me. But I think also being able to look at yourself and really be honest with yourself.
I do think it's a fine line. I never saw that in you, but I do think it's a fine line. You were very good at what you did, and you knew you were good. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's acceptable. You having an expectation of yourself to be that level, and being able to deliver. Right. I think that's one of the things you see in the NFL is people ask all the time, is he make a good locker room leader? Well, he can only make a good locker room leader if he can do it on the field, right?
Right, exactly.
And so, and then it's his opportunity. Then he has to choose to be a good locker room leader.
Right.
Once he's done it on the field.
Although I did have a chance to do it in the locker room just one time.
You scared the living daylights out of me, man.
Folks, if you don't know, he's asking me, he goes, "Can you snap me a ball?" And I'm like, you know what? I did it for 15 years, but there's not like a minor league system. I really haven't snapped much since I retired. At the time would have been about 10 years ago, and it was only about 12 yards back, and you're saying some stuff, and I get ready to snap it, and I snap it to you. It was a pretty decent snap, and you're like, it caught you off guard. You're like, oh my goodness, what was that?
That ball came so fast. That was a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. The best part about that is you were bent over getting ready to snap it, and Jay White, one of the equipment guys, goes, he broke some guy's fingers one time.
It was actually nose.
Nose, was it nose? Okay.
Yeah.
All I heard was broken bones.
But you're like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah. And folks, if you don't know, so one time, when we would get on offense, I would go back there and I'd warm up 2 or 3 times on the sideline, just off there. And there was more press back then. And one guy, it was a cold day, and probably in the lower 50s, just not a great day. And I really let one fly. It was good. And I don't look when I snap, but my head goes through as I fall through, so I see it just for a second. And I just remember seeing it hit this guy right in the nose. His nose literally exploded. Blood everywhere. Blood went everywhere. Dr.
Eckerly?
Yeah. He set his nose on the sideline. I called the next day to apologize, and he goes, dude, no, I've been there before. I know what you do. I wasn't watching, but I still felt terrible.
You keep your eyes peeled when you're on that sideline.
Keep your eyes peeled. Well,
do you know the thing that surprised me about that time you snapped me the ball though is, I've caught balls from pros before. Like when they've been thrown, it comes so much faster than when a thrown ball is. Yeah. I mean, that ball is flying.
It moves along. Now, I would say if you had a QB throw you, if you had a QB really zing one, it would go even faster than that. I've done the math. So the ball goes about 43 miles an hour. It spins at about a 600 revolutions per minute thing. When I snap them for field goals, they're at a 5-degree angle, and there's a few other things we talk about, but. Yeah,
that's all there is to that job, huh?
And it's just that easy, folks. Only in America can you throw a ball between your legs and get paid for it, or talk on the radio and get paid for it. So, okay, it's the extra point. So we'll end with this. Is there any other thing you'd like to talk about, or anything you want to go back over?
No, man. I'm just glad to see you.
Ditto. Appreciate that.
I love you.
I love you as well, folks. This has been the extra point. This has easily been my favorite. Back to you. Take care.